welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/follow. Today in the show, we have Jill Wener and Maiysha Clairborne. Jill is an internal medicine physician. Maiysha is an integrative family physician. And together, they wrote the article, How the Culture of Healthcare Perpetuates Racism. Jill and Maiysha, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but I'm going to ask both of you to just briefly share your stories and journeys to where you are today. Jill, why don't you go first?
So I am an internist, as you mentioned. I practiced hospital medicine for 10 years and have transitioned out of clinical medicine in 2016, unwittingly, but ended up becoming a meditation instructor, EFT tapping practitioner. And I started getting into anti-racism work in 2016 after I got called out, or maybe I got called out about a blog post I had written, and started to take the work very seriously, and then attended a training in 2019 called Allies in Action with Leslie Mack and Paige Ingram that really opened my eyes to even more things and helped me start to even conceive of taking this work outwardly instead of it just being something for my own life. And my contribution as a white woman, for people listening and can't see my skin, is that I am part of the problem, and I do a lot of hard work to try to realize how I might be contributing and use the tools, the meditation and the tapping and other tools to give myself the emotional intelligence really to hang in there when it gets really tough. And I was nothing until I met Maiysha. So,
Hey, Maiysha, briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Of course. So as stated, integrative medicine, family physician, and I retired from clinical medicine in 2016. And my journey actually was to physician wellness. So I've been very committed to the health and wellness of well-being of moms in medicine. However, in 2020, we're going to fast forward because I've done a lot of things in between, when the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd's, the murders of these three happened in succession. It was hit very close to home. And of course, this was amongst the pandemic, and I was already feeling a little bit restless about, how I could contribute. And for me, my particular brand of expertise as an NLP practitioner, hypnotherapist, person who's got expertise in communication, conscious communication, I felt like I could bring something different to the world of this diversity, equity, inclusion conversation. Enter Jill, and she had created Conscious Anti-Racism, and together, we found our complementary selves to be able to expand and do this work inside of healthcare systems and beyond, and create the course, recreate the course. So that's, for me, it was the events of 2020 that sort of catapulted me, because lived experience is lived experience. I've dealt with this all my life. And it was the events of 2020 that really flipped the switch for me.
Sure. And you talk more about both of your anti-racist work and that intersection with healthcare in the Kevin MD article, How the Culture of Healthcare Perpetuates Racism. So Jill, for those who didn't get a chance to read that article, just walk my audience through it, share the story why you and Maiysha decided to write it.
Sure. So there's a really, really incredible article called The Characteristics of White Supremacy Culture that was written by Dr. Tema Okun and her mentor, Kenneth Jones. And she talks about 15 or 16 attributes of culture that perpetuate racism, that perpetuate the power structure that is in place right now, which is keeping white people at the top and other people to varying in different degrees not at the top. And that's one of the things that our conscious anti-racism curriculum is really based on, and how to recognize those characteristics within ourselves and also in the world around us, and then the tools to improve that, to process the emotions, and then also to do better moving forward. So what we really wanted to do was take a look at how these characteristics show up in healthcare, because they're everywhere, and healthcare is no exemption. And as a white, liberal, well-meaning physician, I never would have said, oh yeah, I'm part of the problem back when I was practicing medicine. And I think bringing some of this to light can really help people to see where they might be, even if it's not telling bad, racist jokes and stuff, there's still things that happen all the time that contribute to this culture that upholds the power structure. And so that was really where we wanted to highlight. And one of the characteristic that we highlighted was paternalism, which is something that's widespread everywhere in our world, but also extremely widespread in healthcare.
So Jill, when you talk specifically about paternalism in healthcare, what are some examples that you could cite?
Maiysha, do you want to jump in?
Sure.
Well, particularly the fact that this is a very male-dominated industry, and we can look at the pay structure. We can just start with that, the pay structure, and how if you were to look at the pay structure, you would see that male physicians and female physicians, there is a gap in pay. So that's part of it. And then there's this whole idea of one knows best. Like, as a physician, we know best, and without any feedback. Now, that's something that's bred into the culture. Like, that's something that I learned, is like, you're the doctor, you know best. But that's a very paternalistic attitude that is conditioned into the culture. I mean, that's just one or two examples of many, many that we can provide.
And it's subtle. It's not like people who are paternalistic are racist. It's like, these are some of the attributes that like coexist and hold up racism. And there's so many, I mean, assuming that someone wouldn't want a job promotion because they have a family, or, oh, they wouldn't want it because it would be too many hours or something like that, like making decisions on behalf of other people without actually asking them, that comes up a lot as well.
And it even exists in attitudes toward like moms and women, I should say, the attitude towards and not just from men to women, but women to women leaders to other female physicians, the attitude towards when a woman physician chooses motherhood, chooses family, and chooses to take care of herself over, breaking her neck in the clinical space.
Maiysha, so if one sees an episode of paternalism, such as you and Jill describe, what are some things that we could do next?
I think that noticing is probably the first thing. And one of the reasons that we wanted to bring this article is to bring in awareness. A lot of things are in our unconscious, or in the background, or in our blind spots. But when you begin to understand the nature of paternalism, then you can notice it in oneself and in another. And you can sort of gently name it, right? Sometimes it's gently, sometimes for some who are experiencing it may not be so gently. But noticing and naming are probably two of the most powerful things that can happen in the space, if it feels like a safe space to do so. Because we have to acknowledge that medicine has not always been a safe space for people to name things, especially when it goes against the grain.
And Jill, same question to you. So if one notices instances of paternalism, what are your recommendations in terms of how we can respond to that?
I think it's like Maiysha said, when you learn about it, you see it everywhere. It's like, once you're aware of it, it's everywhere. So if you're on rounds and seeing someone with the attitude that they know better than the patient, and the patient's they don't know enough about their own body. We're the ones that we're the ones that are making the recommendations. How dare they question us? Pipe up, I wonder if it would be helpful for this patient to share more about their experience, or with like international medical missions. White saviorism is a really big example of, and I'm totally guilty of it. I've done it myself. So I'm not, there's no finger pointing out there. It's pointing back at me at the same time. So just questioning, like, what is it that I'm really looking to do out in this country? Who do I think I'm better? And if so, why? And questioning that, noticing it, naming it, and then questioning, like, is this right? Is there another way to think about it? I think is also important.
Can I just add one more thing? I love what you said, Jill. There's a way that you name something, and it's, using the I wonder and the I notice word. I notice that. I wonder if this would be helpful for us to do, in addition to the yes and is often very powerful in language, because it's not the naming itself, it's how it gets done that can cause the backlash. So the I notice and the I wonder and the I'm confused about something. We call it the Columbo.
So let's put some of those ideas in action. So as you know, medicine is a very hierarchical organization, and sometimes it's difficult for medical trainees, students, or even junior attendings to speak up against that. So take some of the ideas that you just mentioned and maybe give a case study or example of how someone who is lower down on that medical hierarchy can speak up against some of the patriarchy that they may see. So I'm going to ask Maiysha, why don't you take that question? Put some of those ideas in action. What are some specific things that they can do or say?
Well, so before I say that, what I want to say is it's in our culture, it's not safe for residents and medical students to speak up as of current. So a lot of this falls on the onus of the leadership, and they have to make it safe, right? So perhaps if a junior resident or a medical student wants to speak up about something that they've seen, then maybe they bring together a consortium of students together, because oftentimes membership helps, right? And then there could be maybe an indirect approach, like a letter could be written, because that gives some space between the recipient and their ability to react and respond, and then go get checked in and then come back and respond. That could be an approach for, like, say, medical students particularly, but even a resident could write a letter or write an email saying, hey, can we meet? Going to the side rather than doing it in public. So maybe not in front of the patient, because there's an automatic defensiveness that could come with that. But like maybe later, hey, I just knock on the door. I just wanted to say that I noticed something and I wonder if this could have been helpful. So it's, in a sense, not questioning the authority, but it's, getting some context. So I would say that would be more like very practical ways to approach if a junior is wanting to speak up to, say, like a senior physician or a resident. Senior physician attending.
And Jill, you mentioned that in the beginning there were 14 characteristics of white supremacy culture that sometimes is infiltrating healthcare. We talked about patriarchy as one. So what's another one that you would like to talk about today?
Oh God, there's so many. So paternalism for sure. Perfectionism is one of them. And I feel like anyone listening to this who is in healthcare at all can probably relate to perfectionism. Only run right way. So because we learned about it in allopathic medical school, then that is the way that it should be done. And therefore, chiropractors sometimes cause vertebral artery dissections. So therefore they're all quacks, like it's that mindset of we are one right way. And if it's not like us, it doesn't work. Defensiveness. So Maiysha, when you were talking about, when someone speaks up, the first thing that happens generally is defensiveness. That's the sign of a culture where we're not going to challenge the power structure. And so for people to learn when they're getting defensive is huge in shifting culture, because that's like learning the skills to recognize when it's happening, like, ooh, I hear myself saying these things, or my heart's pounding. When we realize we're being defensive, it's like, how can we learn to speak up, but also how can we learn to receive the speaking up? How can we be called in? And so I think defensiveness is a huge one that is so powerful to recognize. And so, I'm defensive all the time. It's so part of our culture, and it's also using tools to get to know yourself better. It actually is something that can be addressed. So those are a few, but there's so many more.
I want to add another one. I definitely want to add in either or thinking. We call it binary thinking. Either or thinking is very exclusive thinking, and it doesn't leave space for creativity, which, as much as medicine is a practice of science, it is an art as well. And there are solutions that can be arrived at when we do the both and rather than the either or. So that either or is another characteristic. And then worship of the written word. And I particularly, as a person who's integrative medicine, there are practices that are still emerging in their evidence-basedness, right? And maybe the word is not in the United States, but that worship of the written word is like, if it's not in the textbook, right here, then it is not valid. So like that is another example of one of the characteristics as well.
So let's talk about next steps. So we've identified several characteristics where the culture of healthcare perpetuates racism. So let's talk about the path forward. Jill, what is the path forward?
Well, train yourself, get yourself educated. So I think really the first step, if you're anybody, any identity, is to recognize that this white supremacism culture, it impacts all of us in different ways. No one is exempt from it. And it doesn't mean that we're all racist. This is not a personal judgment at all. It's just a sign that there's like discovery and inquiry that needs to happen. So recognizing like, I'm part of the problem, I'm impacted by it in what way? In what way am I, not am I, but in what ways am I perpetuating it? We trained a board of a healthcare organization, and the CEO was a Black woman. And she was like, oh my God, I've been doing things in my business, the way I'm running the business, that are characteristics of white supremacy culture that she hadn't even seen. So it is not only about white people. This is everybody, because it gets internalized. If you're kind of the object of it and the receiving end, it gets internalized. So recognize that oneself may be part of the problem, and then start to do the inquiry, look within, start to read stuff, ask, don't depend on people of color who are on the receiving end of racism to educate you, but start to educate yourself. We have an online course that's CME accredited. So like something like that. There's a bunch of stuff out there. We have a book. There's so much wonderful education out there for people to learn, to take accountability, because there's so much work that needs to be done on a systemic level. And also the system is made of individuals.
That's right.
Yeah, Maiysha, tell us about the path forward.
I think that, just to piggyback up on what Jill said, one of the biggest things is to be open. Be open to that maybe the way that you think is not the only way to think, and that has been influenced by the culture around you. And then once you start to be open, then it makes it easier to look within, right? We're not convicting people. This is an exploration. And I do think, and I know that this is beginning to happen, but there definitely needs to be top-down commitment. So we need the commitment of CEOs and leaders and leaders of departments. This can't just fall on, you can't just throw a person of color in a DEI position and say, here, handle this. Mm-hmm. This needs to be a collective leadership effort if we're going to shift the culture. And we have to also understand that it's not going to happen overnight. So we got to be ready for the marathon. This work is not easy. However, it must be done, right? Sure. Paraphrase of a quote.
And my final question to both of you, take-home messages to the Kevin MD audience. Jill, we'll start with you.
Ooh, okay. Take-home message is, this isn't just about racism. It is a lot about racism, and everyone in this world has someone that they love that is impacted by, on the receiving end of policies that don't include people. You may know someone who has autism or ADHD, or they are, have hearing issues or other physical disabilities, or they're gay, or they're not citizens, or there's so many different identities that are impacted by this. And the more of those identities you have, the more you're impacted. So the take-home message is, this is for everybody, and doing this work benefits. It doesn't make white people have less. It brings everybody up. And I think that's really important to remember.
Hey, Maiysha, your take-home messages.
I love what you said, Jill, of course. And I think what I would add to that is to begin to just notice. Notice your thinking. Notice your space, even listening to this podcast. Notice what's going on in your body. Let that be an indication for what work needs to be done, and be open to do it. Because just being willing to be uncomfortable. I mean, this is not even comfortable for people of color or for people with marginalized identities. People think it's easy for, Black people to talk about racism. Nah, it's not. So just notice what's going on, be willing to sit in the discomfort, because that is where the transformation occurs.
Jill and Maiysha, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Kevin. We appreciate it.